Yang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! So nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, it's and true. Come roll with the Yang gang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
We got Mike Broihier back at the encore performance. Welcome back to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Tom. And you notice I've gone full dork with the headset here, but I'm good. It's
you're not messing around. Next time you come on, you're gonna have a green screen and you're gonna have all kinds of crazy stuff going on.
Wow, there's a thought. Maybe we'll have to do that.
You know what? No, you wouldn't. We shouldn't rule it out. We shouldn't rule it out. So for this episode, when I was chatting with folks on your team, I said, hey, one of the things that came up in our last conversation was how not only are you former Marine officer, but you taught and studied leadership. And it's a topic of perpetual interest to me. And so I was hoping that we could spend the first 15, 20 minutes talking about leadership in general, your philosophies on leadership, things you've learned, leadership mistakes you've made, things lessons, you've kind of learned the hard way. And then we could then shift gears and talk obviously about the crisis that we are in now and your take on the leadership that we're getting currently and how you think it could be done better. And then we'll take some audience questions and sounds like call it a day. How's that sound to you?
That sounds great. That sounds fantastic. I have to tell you though, I feel a little bit like Penelope Spheris here. I don't know if you follow Mark Maron's podcast, but he had President Obama in his garage on his podcast. And
yeah.
And the next interview he did was with Penelope Spheris. Now, fine director, gave us Decline of the Western Civilization and Wayne's World, but I mean, she sat in the chair after President Obama did. So I guess I've got to follow sitting down here after the boss and talking to you. It's quite an honor.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because we did have Andrew on the show just like about 24 hours ago.
And you gave him so much grief about his sweater that I went with the blue shirt and the blazer because I was like, man, I'm not going down that path with Tom. So
no. I was it's just like you always see someone in he is always in the same blue blazer and light blue shirt. And it was kind of just unusual. It's sort of, it reminded me? It reminded me of do you remember like in elementary school when you would see your teacher in the grocery store?
Right, exactly.
And you'd be like, whoa, this is weird. Like, why are you in this new environment? So, but I'm glad to have you back.
I substitute teach in our local elementary schools, and when the kids see me in the supermarket or whatever, you could just see this moment of confusion. It's like, no, you only exist in this one space.
Yeah. It's like, oh, what's Mr. Broihier doing over here? Like he's buying bread. Like why? It's just so he's the human. Cool. Well, I'm glad to have you back, and I'm curious. Like my view about leadership has evolved. It continues to evolve. Like I'm no spring chicken, but I mean, literally, I was just in a meeting at work on Friday, doing a retrospective on a project that had some challenges. And, I was in one of those moments where I had to say, like, guys, I screwed up here. I should have done this differently. And for me, like, you always think like you get better every year. But I continue to have retrospectives where I'm like, yeah, I should have done this a little different. I was curious, like, your view on leadership. You come from a military background but as well as an educator and a journalist or editor. I have a very kind of private sector view of leadership. I was curious, like how you define leadership. Why don't we start there?
Well, first thing I want to say that, what you endured was the second leadership principle, which is know yourself and seek self-improvement. And the funny thing is, Thomas, that a lot of people just intuitively, they you know what? It's like the old Supreme Court justice's explanation of pornography. He said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think intuitively people know good leaders. And when I was teaching at Berkeley, and students were the NROTC students from Stanford and Davis and Berkeley, but the bulk of my class was just regular Berkeley kids. And so I'd start this class. I taught leadership and management, and we used to run through this drill where I'd have them, talk about people that they respected who really inspired them, whether it was a teacher, coach, their parents, faith leader, someone like that. And I'd write down all these words on the board, that they were using, and then I'd do this reveal. And then on that side of the other side of the board where I did the reveal, we had the leadership traits, the military leadership traits, and then I could just take the white marker and just draw straight lines. So intuitively, all of us know good leadership when they see it. And I guess for me, it's it's inspiring people and making good use of your assets to accomplishment of mission. And that's your boilerplate definition of leadership. But there's so much that goes involved, and what you were saying earlier about having to do that retrospective. We always called them hot washes or after actions in the military, where even after every patrol, we'd sit down and go through what went well, what went wrong, what do we need to do better next time. In fact, my wife was a part of an organization called the Marine Corps Center for Lessons Learned, and she went to Afghanistan for a year, and her job was she had a particular area of expertise. There was aviation representative, ground combat, and she was logistics representative, and she would fly around and talk to or travel in convoys to all these outlying bases and interview people on I think she had a schedule 30, 90, 180 days into their deployment. Like, okay, what did you bring with you that you wish you left behind? What did you wish you bring with, what did you wish that you brought with you? And then she would do this over time, and it all went into a giant database that's searchable. So new units that were coming in, getting ready to either deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan, could take a look at those lessons learned and say, okay, we are not going to make this mistake. Now, it wasn't 100% perfect, but it was a pretty good start than having to reinvent the wheel for every single cycle that people came into country into combat zone. So,
yeah, it sounds like there's definitely some commonalities between our very kind of less life and death retrospectives where we're talking about, hey, this project was late, or we made this decision that we had to kind of change at the last minute, and now the product isn't going out the same way that we wanted it to, or whatever it might have been. I'm curious, like this notion of reflection and constant improvement, it doesn't seem like that is embraced in modern day politics as much. I almost feel like in modern day politics today, if a candidate acknowledges that they did something wrong or something they would have done again, it's like, oh, we got you.
Right.
You see? And I was curious, like, how is that translated to your running for office? Do you feel like, well, you kind of can't show any weakness, and you have to always look like you're, winning, and you're doing everything, with flawlessly?
Well, I'll tell you, and I know that you're describing a reality for a lot of people, but I found the exact opposite to be true. That if you're willing to say, man, I really stepped in at that time, people at least here in Kentucky, people appreciate honesty.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the biggest mistake I made in my campaign. Want to hear it already?
Yeah.
I'll be willing. Confession time. Okay. When I started my campaign, my main opponent in the primary has made quite a bit of her military career, and she had run for office in 2018, and it was all about being in the military. And I was so sick of it, man. I just, honest to God, said that I'm not even going to talk about the military. I'm going to let her own that space, and she can. So, anyways, here's how I came to my comeuppance. We did there was a candidate forum for United Mine Workers, and my opponent was introduced as a true American hero, and and she did her thing, and I get introduced as, and then we got this guy. And it literally threw me. That was the worst public speech I ever gave in my life, and I was kicking myself the whole time because it literally completely threw me off my stride. And that was when I said, all right, this was a huge mistake. I'm never going to be introduced as, I don't want anyone to say, oh, this guy's an American hero, because I'm not, but I sure as heck don't want to be introduced as this guy. And even as late as 2 weeks ago, there was a large candidate forum, and this is how long it has haunted me. After almost 9 months, my opponent was constantly addressed as Lieutenant Colonel McGrath, and I was Mr. Broihier. And so after 9 months, that crappy decision that I made as a candidate was haunting me. So owning up to your mistakes definitely humanizes you, and I think that being honest, being honest is the most important thing that I can give to the people of Kentucky right now. So that's my dumb story on leadership failures in this campaign. But it was a mistake, and my wife said it was a mistake, and everyone advised me a campaign said I was making a mistake, but I said, no, man, I'm going straight ahead.
Yeah. Well, I empathize with where you were coming from, because I kind of find it a little off-putting if people wear their service on their sleeve continuously. And like every sentence is like, well, when I was in Afghanistan, it's like, I don't know. I kind of feel like part of service is like, no, you didn't do it because you would want to tell everybody about it, but you did it because like it was the right thing to do, and you wanted to serve the country, and you don't need a lot of like overt kind of praise and that kind of thing. Like in grad school, I went to. I had a couple of classmates who were in the Navy SEALs, and they never talked about it. Never. Yeah. Like even when I would ask them, I would be like, "Oh, tell me." They were like, "Oh, it wasn't really that big of a deal." And then I was like thinking to myself, "Oh, it definitely must have been a big deal." Like they would always play it down. And so I'm guessing part of you was like, hey, you know what you've done for the country. You put in the years. You've earned your lieutenant colonel status. You don't have to put it on a giant like banner and walk around with it every day. But I guess maybe you overcorrected. I don't know.
I did. It was a giant mistake. But it's interesting. The SEALs, used to be the silent professionals, the special operations, and now it's like, where's my book deal? And they're going through a retrospective right now. Right. And some real soul searching as a community to say, okay, we need to get back to the days where people didn't know our business. And but anyway, so it's interesting how these things go in cycles. And the other thing about the military is that acknowledging that the only reason you got where you were was because of the like for me, it was the Marines I was honored enough to lead, and the people who were in charge of me, and who, if I made a mistake, if I was at least going in the right direction when I fell on my, they were like, all right, get up, dust yourself off, that hurt, don't make that mistake again, and off you go. And I'll be honest with you, there were a couple of points in my career where a boss would have been justified in firing me. Would have been the easiest explanation for what went wrong would have been to hang me out to dry. And but I was so fortunate in every instance to have bosses who trusted me and you have to, and hopefully I was able to treat my subordinates the same way, and let them make their own mistakes in their own time. Give them good guidance. Keep them, I had a boss who used to say, there are dotted lines and there are solid lines in the highway. Feel free to move across the dotted lines, but stay far away from the solid lines. And so hopefully, and that allows people to grow as leaders too when they make their mistakes. I don't want, you got to be careful of that person out there who just doesn't learn from their mistakes or blames it on their subordinates. Either one, those are, which kind of, go ahead. Sorry.
You talk about you benefited from having served under great leaders. I'm curious, like as a civilian, I grew up. I still remember press conferences by Norman Schwarzkopf.
Yeah.
I still have fond memories for press conferences by Colin Powell. I found that Mattis, he seems like very erudite and thoughtful. Kelly, I felt was very clear-eyed and a strong leader as well. I'm curious, when you think about great leaders that you've observed, who comes to mind and what makes them great leaders versus just good leaders?
It is. I think it's a common touch, and an ability to. I mean, again, it goes back to remembering from where you came, and the people who I have always thought were the best leaders were the ones who had the closest relationship with the troops. And I'm not talking about being pals with them, but I'm talking about cared the most for their subordinates. And I you mentioned Colin Powell, and if we got a minute, I'll tell you a quick boring story here. But
do it.
in 93 in Mogadishu, Colin Powell was coming to visit, and my CO, a great Marine, a great leader, was in charge of not just my battalion, but beneath us he had a handful of companies of soldiers from other nations, from Zimbabwe, and from we had a company from Kuwait, we had a company from Botswana, we had some Egyptians, and so they had this greeting for Colin Powell, and it was very all formalized. And Powell was supposed to troop the line and shake the hand with the battalion commander and move on. And as soon as he got in front of my boss grabbed him by the arm and said, come on, Mr. Secretary, and meet the guys. And he brought him down and took him out of the line and took him down to each of the commanding officers of those companies that we had from other countries. And and the fact that many of these companies were from Africa, and he had this African-American man who had risen to the top of his field. And so two things. One, it was Powell's willingness to do that and his understanding how important it was. And also my boss's courage to just say, yeah, I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to. And I'll tell you what, he wasn't done with calculation. He did it because it was the right thing, but he got 100,000 miles more out of those troops we got from other countries. And Powell spent time talking to them, shaking their hands, asking them, it was fantastic. And so I'm a young captain watching this going, I want to be that guy. I want to be courageous, and I want to be, that tuned into the situation that I can make a call on the spot and make something like that happen. And I don't know if I am, but at least I had a good role model. And I'll tell you go ahead.
Oh, so it sounds like in that story, it was more moving to see your CO kind of stick his neck out and say, like, hey, I really want to, give the rest of the soldiers an opportunity to interact with General Powell. Of course, General Powell, I'm sure, acted with great dignity and humility and was gracious, but it sounds like it was your CO's decision to, hey, I'm not just going to do the quick handshake and then let this opportunity pass itself by.
Oh yeah, he did that without telling anybody. I mean,
yeah,
and
because if he did, he probably would have said, hell no, you're not going to do that.
Exactly, and you're right. And Powell responded perfectly, and it was we call that a force multiplier. And just a couple of quick words, like I said, we got another 100,000 those guys who were pretty tired at the time. So, and again, it's just standing there as a young captain watching that going, that's the guy I want to be, you know?
Mm-hmm. Totally. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your race, and then we'll for sure go into the Corona stuff. And maybe we'll bleed into that now. But basically, I've seen on your Twitter account, you are very quick to call Mitch McConnell to task. And so I'm guessing you don't think that he is being a great leader. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what is it about him or his leadership style that's lacking? I'll just play devil's advocate for a moment. I mean, he is highly regarded as someone who knows how to work the system, who can get the outcomes he wants out of the Senate, and has a great relationship with the president and the commander in chief. So, I mean, on those lines, you could say, wow, he's doing great. He's a great leader. So it got kind of curious how you look at him.
Well, he's a great politician, but not a great leader. And so we value, clearly we value different things. That might be something that one admires amongst politicians, that be able to wheel and deal and exert influence. But in my mind, they are all based on selfishness and self-aggrandizement and consolidation of power. And that is doing, and when the nation is not at risk, maybe those are something people can kind of smile and go, wow, that's just politics. But as quickly as we've seen, McConnell calling for bipartisanship all of a sudden, and it's just a play on his part, because he's trying to save himself. He's trying to save the Trump presidency from the train wreck that it is. And all the things that we use to characterize leadership, the ability to make quick decisions, decisiveness, courage, like moral courage, not physical courage for politicians, but moral courage, making decisions even though you know that they're unpopular, and making sound and timely decisions. That is something that has not been happening. And these are all things that I look at as a leader. And so while he may be a skillful politician, he is not helping lead this country in the direction we need to be. And like I said, as quickly as we've seen him turn, when all of a sudden the numbers, the infected numbers and the death numbers began to rise, seriously, all of a sudden it's time for bipartisanship and it's time to work together. And so, yeah, I'd say good politician, crappy leader.
Well, what would you have done differently if you were in his shoes?
Well, it's, benefit of hindsight here, but I think the most important thing is you making sound and timely decisions. We use this phrase in the military, and it's if you're in a tough fight, and if you're up against strong odds, what you always need in every fight is speed, surprise, and violence of action. And coming from an amphibious background, where at one point there was one guy he's the first guy to put his foot on a beach, and everybody in the world is aiming at him. And then until you can project enough power ashore to overcome initial defense like D-Day or other Pacific battles, you need speed, surprise, and violence of action. And then it kind of maps to making decisions against something like the coronavirus. You have to make them fast, because as fans of math, you guys can show that you can trace directly from one person. We know the transmission rate, we know the infection rate, and we know the death rate. And every day that you wait, you can say, okay, this day we've caused X number of people to die. And it's a heck of a lot more than it was the day before. Now, surprise, not necessarily so much, but surprise is coming up with unusual solutions or thinking outside the box. And violence of action is just doing it hard. Like, okay, I've decided and we're going to hit it now. And so, it kind of applies to the way we need, we should have taken bold action, months ago. We're finding out now that the briefings going back as far as January, this is a pandemic. That the president, the Senate Intelligence Committee, all those folks, National Security Council, were briefed that this is going to be a global pandemic, and they did nothing. In fact, they did the opposite. They passed disinformation. They could have even quietly begun working behind the scenes, making sure, like we find out now that the USNS Comfort and Mercy are tied up in San Diego and Norfolk for maintenance.
Yeah.
They don't have crews on them. Yeah, but if you'd started down this path 3 months ago, just even getting people moving in the right directions, we would not be in the situation that we are right now. And so I would say, and the other thing, of course, Tom, is this is something that I'm sure the nerds understand, is the difference between data, information, and actionable knowledge, right? Is that data is just these masses of numbers coming in, and really for a leader or decision maker, it doesn't do us any good. It needs to be. We need to put it in context. If there's 6 coronavirus deaths in New York and 6 in Wyoming, that really, it doesn't mean anything, right? But are the 6 in Wyoming all in one nursing home? That means something, and that's actionable knowledge. And so having good people advising you and taking their advice and you have to take ego out of these decisions, because it's too late. It's too late to be trying to, you want to save your presidency, you want to save your seat in the Senate, you make good, sound, timely decisions right now. You hit them hard and you stick with them, and at least you're going in the right direction and you're trying to save lives, not trying to save your political career.
How much of that falls at the feet of the White House versus the Senate? It seems like the senators might have been briefed, but I presume they would have taken the position of, the executive branch is going to look into this, and, we're here to legislate. We don't need to enact new legislation yet. Or do you think the Senate should have played a more kind of co-equal role with the executive branch on this one?
Well, they're a co-equal branch of government. Yeah. And the idea of that we have got these co-equal branches of government, that one serves as check and balance on the other. If one is, if one side's letting down the team, you can't just, again, in peacetime and normal situations, you can say, we'll let this play out. But when people's lives are at stake, it's not politics, it's not a game, and it's not, a headline in this news cycle. It's people dying, and they've destroyed the economy, and it's gonna leave a mark. I think that it's not that the White House is an unknown quantity. You could have predicted almost verbatim what the president was going to say, right? Like if you go back to I think the second year of the Trump presidency, after they've been trying to get rid of Obamacare and replace it with something else, the president finally said, "Who knew it was this complex?" Well, dude, everyone knew. Everyone but you knew. And so here we are. Now we flash forward, whatever it is, another year. Now we're facing this coronavirus. And I swear, just last week, the president said, "Who knew it was going to be this bad?" It was like, dude, everybody but you. And it is a huge leadership failure. Because there is responsibility among our other elected leaders to influence the executive. And you said it yourself in the beginning. You said that the Senate Majority Leader has got a lot of influence over the executive branch. Didn't exercise it. And it's interesting. Like, I'm guessing if you look at military history, I'm sure there were times where there have been generals who had blinders on and relied on their team in a discreet way to help help that general kind of formulate the best plan for the forces under them. And it seems to me like Mitch is a bit of an enabler. Like, I don't think he really, as far as I can tell, it doesn't seem like he pushes back on Trump. I think he tries to just sort of draft off of the energy of Trump and tries not to kind of disrupt things, probably because he can see that when you do disagree with Trump, like, you get primaried and a lot of bad things happen to you.
So do you think that Mitch is just sort of like protecting his interests? Do you think he's just not plugged in or not doesn't care? Or what do you think is motivating him to act the way he does?
Well, you nailed it. I mean, he will always act to protect his self-interest. Always. Every decision, all right, so just take one non-coronavirus related thing. So obviously in Kentucky, we have coal mines here, and there is something called the Black Lung Disability Trust Fund, right? And this is something that the that coal companies pay a per ton rate, and this goes into this trust to care for all of these coal miners who are suffering from black lung. These are Mitch McConnell's constituents, right? So in 2018, I think, he allowed the authorization for the Black Lung Disability Trust Fund to lapse. And over the years, they'd done, over the course of 30, 40 years, they'd increased how much per ton the coal companies were supposed to be paying into it. So when that lapsed, it automatically fell back to the 1970s rate. And this fund is going bust. Now, there's two parts of this. First, the cost of this is being transferred to the taxpayers. Sounds like socialism to me, but the other part of this, though, is these are his constituents. These are people that in the past, particularly in Appalachia and the coal fields out in Western Kentucky, these are people who have voted for him year and year and year and year and year and year out, and sent him back to Washington for 35 years. And that shows that he does not care about his constituents, doesn't care about Kentucky. He cares about the money he gets from the coal companies, which allows him to keep his position in Washington. And so he will always make decisions that are only in his best interest.
Yeah, that sounds like the very swampy, to borrow a term from the 2016 cycle, which is ironic given the party. But at any rate, one thing I'm curious about, Mike, is I've noticed, like we've talked about, this is the Nerds for Humanity channel. We definitely love to look at charts and data and metrics, but I don't think that's only a nerd thing. Like I'm guessing in the military, like good, solid intelligence and data is useful for making good decisions. And it seems like what's going on in DC is it's very, focused on why the other party sucked, or why your party did it too, and what about this and what about that, and not very data driven at all. Like when I go to I watch those briefings and press conferences by the president, it's not, I don't see many charts or data about infection rates or demand for ventilators or ICU beds versus supply. I don't see any of that. I don't see any like information. And I'm curious how you look at that. Do you feel like it's a little bit sort of light on data and facts, or
absent thereof?
Yeah.
I mean, just testing alone. I mean, really, do we have any data? I mean, I think Republic of Korea is testing 10,000 people a day, and so they've probably tested, I mean, maybe 1 million people so far, and we've tested in the tens of thousands. So your data set is probably lousy anyways. The fact that someone is, the fact that we don't test someone unless they're presenting symptoms, right away skews the data, right? I mean, how do we really know what the infection rate is if you're not testing? I mean, in places in Asia, Singapore, Taiwan, every time you enter and exit a building, there's someone there with a thermometer, and that is generating great data. And I'm not a stretch a mathematician or a scientist, but I understand it. And but anyways, about the absence of data, the president is information averse. He just, I don't think it sticks. I don't think he likes it. I don't think it's boring. But there are some simple things. The one chart that we've all seen is flatten the curve, right? Yeah. That's that's nothing new. I mean, we learned, talk about lessons learned. Everything we need to know about this, we learned in 1918, 1919. There really, really is no difference in how this is how it's transmitted. The numbers might be slightly different, but the patterns are exactly the same. And if you go back to even if you go back to 1918, Philadelphia did not cancel. And it's funny because it's this time of year. Philadelphia refused to cancel their St. Patrick's Day parade. Huge event in Philadelphia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then 10, 15 days later, their infections went through the roof. And you can trace it straight back to the fact that they refused to take action to enforce social distancing. It would have been unpopular, and people were taking a lot of grief for it. But that's in the short term, and what ended up happening, they made a lousy decision, and people died. Thousands of people died because a politician didn't want to make an unpopular decision. And that's part of being the boss. And I'm sure you felt this before, having to make unpopular decisions.
Indeed. Yeah. I one of the pieces of advice my manager gave me a year or two ago, he said, Tom, if you're not pissing off some people on a regular basis, you're probably not making hard enough decisions.
Right. I wrote an editorial for my newspaper one time. And in the same week, for the same editorial, I got called a damn Republican and a damn Democrat. And I was like, boy, that must have really hit home, because now everyone's mad at me.
Yeah. It's nuts. Like when you run just even back of the envelope numbers, I was thinking about it this morning. There's according to the census, there's about 50 million Americans who are 60 and older, like kind of in this higher risk group. 50 million of them. And if you look at many countries and projections in Germany and of course in China and South Korea, like it's not crazy to assume that eventually 50% of those 50 million will get infected. So that's 25 million infected people 60 and older. Now, if you assume 10% of them will need critical care because of respiratory issues, that's 2.5 million that will need it. So then I did a little research and I found that we have 90,000 ICU beds in America. And so it's like, well, how does that, we can flatten the curve, but we also need to steepen the supply curve. And I don't see our government talking enough about really, if you're saying it's a wartime situation, then let's produce more critical care beds and let's immediately order more production of ventilators. Like these are things that every day matters. And as a ex-military guy, like, that sometimes seconds matter. And it's just kind of nuts. It feels like a lot of us on both parties, I think, are talking about the economic ramifications, which of course are huge. But I also feel like, hey, if millions of people need critical care and they flood these hospitals, those hospitals are going to get overwhelmed. Not only are the people with corona who need intensive care not going to get it, but everybody else who just needed intensive care because they're also going to get kind of endangered. And it just feels like, where's the war plan to kind of get in front of this?
Oh, sure. It goes back to making sound and timely decisions, but the people who are doing it, I think, all credit to the nation's governors. Jay Inslee out in Washington, he's like way ahead. He's probably 6 weeks ahead of DC. And what did he get for that? The president called him a snake. Yeah, on national television. And now here's a guy who's setting the example and making hard decisions. I mean, they're buying motels and hotels. Just, we'll find the money. Yeah. And that's bold. And to say, I was talking to Scott Santens earlier today, and he said something to me. He's like, buy it now and let the taxes sort it out later. And I was like, amen. Because this is something that you cannot be worried about the politics or the appearance of it. But the nation's governors are doing a great job. And our governor here, Andy Beshear, who just replaced a really atrocious troll of a governor we had until November. They're calling him Mr. Rogers, and that is a compliment. I mean, that is a great thing because I had a lieutenant who worked for me, and everyone likes to have a real macho call sign. Well, his call sign was Mr. Rogers, and his patrol area was called Mr. Rogers Neighborhood because he was calm and he was peaceful. I mean, he'd take the fight to somebody if they needed it, but he planned well. He had a calming effect on people around him. Everyone trusted him. And he was predictable. And in his decision making, not in his actions, but in his decision making, he was predictable. And so, even though I don't think as a young lieutenant he enjoyed being saddled with a call sign, Mr. Rogers, he probably wanted something much more butch than that. But you know what? It reflected what people thought of him. That this is the kind of leader. And so our governor here, Andy Beshear, is doing a fine job and asking some hard questions. And even though he's doing so, we're really falling behind. And there are areas, particularly where we're going to find out the real friction points are going to be in Appalachia and rural parts of Kentucky, because we do not have the beds here. Yeah. In our little town, we have a empty hospital. And I'm hoping that someone right now is walking through and making sure the roof doesn't leak and the power's on, and wondering how quickly we can put that into operation. Because there you could handle all the non-emergency cases. Just stop the number of people from wandering into the ER lobby and being exposed to something they don't need to because they fell down and sprained their ankle, right? Or they just have a common cold. So it's the nation's governors are way out in front of this. Some reluctantly, but they'll save lives by being brave.
Yeah, I was listening a week or two ago. The New York Times daily podcast. They had an interview with Cuomo in New York, and I was very impressed with Cuomo's grasp of. I mean, he was down to like, we project in 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to need 30,000 ICU beds. Right now we have 3,000. We need to get a hold of ventilators. We've been trying, they're trying to buy them from China because China's starting to kind of come down.
Right.
And as much as I have great respect for what these governors are doing, and as a former resident of the state of Washington, I totally agree. Inslee's doing a great job as well. But I also feel like the magnitude of this problem does require leadership at the federal level as well. That these governors may not be able to do it all themselves. And maybe one thing we could talk about, Mike, is right now there's a lot of talk around economic aid and something around, something similar to basic income, or at least some direct cash assistance. There's a debate around means testing and who gets it and how much. What's your read? Where do you stand on this one?
Speed, surprise, and violence action. Man, if they wait and they dither on this and debate a way, of means testing, for example. I mean, what they've come up with now is the most needy people are going to get the least amount of money. That somebody who pays taxes will get $1,200, but if you're living below the poverty level, or you're the working poor and you have no tax liability in 2018, which is the data they're using, then you get half. That is the absolute upside down the way it should be. And I think that they got to make the bold decision. Just say, hey, you know what? Everybody gets it. We will sort it out later. Or draw some line. $100,000, whatever. Pick a number, but make it way, way, way above what that the fact that the working poor or the poor get way less than people who actually paid taxes in 2018. And one thing that Scott said to me today was, we're relying on this invisible safety net, and so you've got say a grandmother who's caring for grandkids, and she's living on her Social Security. She is stretched to the max right now. And if we fool around and we wait, and since she had no tax liability, she gets $600, those kids are going to suffer. And that is not just not a ridiculous example. I mean, I think there's reality for an awful lot of people that we've stretched this invisible safety net about as far as it can go. So the way I look at it is that that we just need to inject this as quickly as possible in the economy. And bailing out businesses, I'll tell you what, last in line in my book. Unless you are employing people in a critical industry, whether that is healthcare or providing food or delivery, or you're part of the supply chain, I think that worrying about whether United or Delta is going to be healthy a year from now is a furthest thing from my mind. We need to inject the money where it's gonna stick. And I'll tell you what else, it can't be for a month. It's got to be for a long period of time. It's got to be for 3 months or 6 months, because what really happens is that when people are desperate, they make bad decisions. People stockpiling toilet paper, right? That's a stupid example, but people are making dumb decisions. But if they know that this is going to happen for the next 3 months or 5 months or 6 months, whatever, it's going to take the panic level down. And I think they're going to make much more sound, rational decisions about what they're going to do with their life. And they're not going to, if they think they're just going to get one check, then maybe they will all go and blow it all on toilet paper, but if they know it's going to be coming in for the next 6 months, I think we're going to have people are going to be making much more rational economic decisions.
Yeah, I mean, as a member of the Yang Gang, I completely agree. A lot of the benefits you're talking about were, I think, what animated a lot of Andrew's support around basic income being very simple, very predictable, and without like pages and pages of rules and regulations, because I think this is one of those things where time matters. And I guess your point about speed is crucial. Like, if people start losing confidence and they start panicking, it only kind of snowballs, and it'll be way more expensive to solve those problems as they get bigger than to kind of prevent them and shore it up now while we still have a chance. But who knows, like 2-3 months from now, if people still are required to stay at home to flatten the curve, and we can't steepen the supply curve fast enough, and then people are worried about paying rent or making their car payment, or their small business is cutting their hours or not, or cutting them entirely.
Right.
People can make pretty tough, they may make self-interested decisions that are just bad for society. And then we all lose, like if we don't have stability and a path forward. So I completely agree with you. Mike, I'd love to start taking some questions from the audience if you'll be willing for a few more minutes.
Hey, man, you know me. I love Q&A. This is like the best part of the day. Are they going to come up on the screen, or are you just going to read them?
I will do both.
All right.
So first question is, how do the people of Kentucky feel about McConnell's leadership? Do you think you have a chance? I mean, you are going after a household name for, we could argue whether he's a household name because people love him or hate him, probably because both, but he's no pushover, and he probably has a war chest. What do you think are your chances, and how do you think constituents are going to evaluate him this time around?
Well, I think it's his approval ratings in the 30s, worst it's ever been. And I think people are on to the game. I don't think you'll see any one of Republicans going out to coal country and giving them the old rah-rah speech about we're going to bring coal back and there's going to be clean coal, because they've just played that so many times. And so, I wouldn't, I think I've got a great chance. And frankly, the fact that he has this reputation doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't bother me at all. And as far as money goes, I think after the primary, he's so hated across the country. When I do spend time every day down on the phone and asking strangers for money. And when I say I'm running against Mitch McConnell, people like,
where do I sign?
well, I wish they'd say that, but they are so incredulous, and they're like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Anybody but Mitch. And I always tell them, so that's kind of a low bar. Let's raise a little bit above anybody but Mitch. Yeah, I think I have a fine chance. And I think that he's just been running this. He's been running this Ponzi scheme on Kentucky for 35 years. And people say, how do you beat him? I beat him with the relentless truth about his record, about his past, and about what he's done for Kentucky, which is jack. And I think with my resume as a teacher, as a farmer, and as a retired veteran, it carries a little bit more weight in Kentucky. People are more willing to listen to you and give you the benefit of the doubt. So yeah, absolutely. I've clearly got a path forward to beating Mitch McConnell.
Love it. All right. Next question is, if UBI goes forward at a state level, how would it be paid for? If it becomes a reality at a national level, will existing UBI states have more of a say in how it's implemented? Like, what is your thinking about basic income at the state versus federal level?
I think it's unworkable. I guess we're talking this time of the coronavirus right now. We're talking the time of pandemic. I think it's unworkable. A state like Kentucky, which cannot fully fund its teachers' pensions, cannot provide UBI. And since states do not, I'm sure there are states that have got that they're operating in the black. That's great. They might be able to do it for a while, but they can't. It's not like the federal government that can basically create money. So my personal belief is that it's not only is it's unworkable state level, but it needs to come from the federal government. And as far now the last thing is, like, here in Kentucky, our unemployment crashed the other day because they got 10 times the number of applications in one day for unemployment than they did on a typical basic, and just basically shelled the system and brought it to its knees. And I think it really, you've got the Social Security Administration, you have the IRS, both mechanisms that can reach into every single state and every one of our pockets, and it can move money the other way too. And so I think the only answer to this is the federal level. If the federal government doesn't do something, then I think states may have to, but there are states like Kentucky who just can't, because we cannot create money.
Yeah.
I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And I mean, the reality is a lot of the economic growth and the profits are being created in other parts of the country. And that it just seems like if you have a state that's struggling, it will be very hard for them to fund a state UBI. It's sort of like asking the poor people to create money for themselves. Like, that's just not the way the resources are allocated right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
You gotta have boots first.
Yeah. Yeah. Note from White Wolf says, hello from Maine, that person's already donated to your campaign.
Thanks,
Have you ever spent time in Maine? I used to live near the Brunswick Naval Air Station, but I don't know if you've ever gone.
Yeah, you went to Bowdoin.
I did. That's right.
Yeah. I lived in Kittery, Maine.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. It was back in the late 80s. I lived in Kittery, Maine. I lived literally overlooking the misnamed Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, which is not in Portsmouth, but in Kittery. Yeah, I lived there for 3 years, and I worked extensively in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and love Maine. And beautiful place. That coastal Maine is spectacular,
especially in the summer. Yeah.
Not during bug season though.
True. I think the winters, as an undergrad, you can kind of handle it because you're a little more kind of high energy. But nowadays, it'd be tougher for me to go back there in the winter. But the autumn is unbeatable.
It is spectacular.
Yeah. All right. Here's another question from Trent around private prisons. what are your thoughts about private prisons and how you deal with recidivism?
Okay. For profit should not be used in the same sentence as secondary education or prisons. I think there's no. I think we've created the term we use in the military, since we're talking military terms today, is self-licking ice cream cone, and that's what we have. In Kentucky, in the last 7 years, we've increased our incarceration of women by 300%. And so we've got this industry, and people work in this industry, and people are making money from this industry. So let's just go put more people in prison. And it doesn't work. And it's interesting when you're talking to people who describe themselves as a fiscal conservative, right? And I like talking to them about prisons. Particularly, I said, what do we get for putting a nonviolent offender in jail for at $124 a day, and so at 20, whatever that comes out to, $24,000 or whatever it works out to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that person is out of the economy. They're away from their family. They are not working or paying child support or supporting their family or kicking into paying their taxes or Social Security. So not only do we now we paying whatever it is, $120 a day to keep them in prison, we are losing whatever the delta is and what they may have contributed. But then there are some people who self-describe fiscal conservatives. You cannot convince them with an argument because they just like putting people in prison. And so, yeah, I'm against private prisons. I don't think anybody, if you talk to jailers, and because of course, jail is the first touch point. People come in contact with law enforcement. They're not in prison. They go to jail awaiting trial. Just the number of people who are awaiting to go to court, who are not on the street because they can't make bail. And I find that the bail system is usurious too, because we have people at the taxpayer's expense literally sitting in jail for 10, 15, 30 days. Okay, they might have been drunk driving. Got it. But if they don't present a clear threat to themselves or other people, we shouldn't spend $3,000 keeping someone in jail keeping somebody in jail for a month just till they can get their court date. It's stupid. Now, as far as recidivism, I think first of all, we jail a hell of a lot less people. And we jail people who are a threat to the community or themselves, or committed violent crimes. So we jail fewer people, and when people have done their time, since the numbers are less, we have a much more methodical and just way to transition them back into the population. When someone leaves prison, they may not have an ID, a valid ID. I mean, what do you need these days? You need to have a valid ID to get a bank account. You cannot get a job unless you have a bank account, because everyone does direct deposit. If you can't get a job that pays in direct deposit or a place you can cash your checks, you go back into the cash economy. And what is that? Stealing or dealing drugs or human trafficking. Mm-hmm. And so we've created the cycle where we basically set people up for failure from the day they walk out of prison. And that's part of my plan to deal with that. And I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, you definitely did. I mean, and it's interesting as a former student of economics, like it's also just to your point, much less efficient allocation of resources to spend $36,000 a year jailing people than providing them, like if we had gone with the Yang proposal with a $12,000 a year basic income. I'd rather pay that bill every day. Right. Not to mention, if you do have access to a basic income, the incentives to commit crime the formula changes. Sure. But if you have nothing today and you feel hopeless, it's not a irrational act for some people to commit crime because they feel like they don't have anything, they don't have any alternatives.
And to self-medicate heavily.
Yeah.
It's that despondency and that lack of a path forward for you or your family and hopelessness. I mean, it drives a lot of bad decision making.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to what we were saying about this coronavirus is we need to give people assurance that they're going to be okay.
Yeah. All right. Next question. We talked about how Kentucky is not the most prosperous state in terms of per capita income and industry growth. A lot of the industries, are like coal, probably not going to be twice as big 50 years from now than it is today. So what's your vision for how Kentucky transitions to a brighter future? And like, what are the critical issues you think that need to be addressed soon in Kentucky in particular?
Well, and this is kind of unpopular when I talk about it here in Kentucky, because everyone wants to know what I'm going to do for them. What are you going to do for me? And I kind of take a different look at Kentucky's economy. And if you take a look at, there are actually 8 coal-producing Appalachian states. All of us, with a significant region of our state, with not just an economic disaster, but environmental disaster. And they're all in literally the same boat. The resources have been ripped out, and the people have been left holding the bag environmentally and economically. And so, I know that traditionally is you got to go to DC and you got to bring home the bacon to your particular state. But I think this problem is big enough that we need a regional solution. I think that the senators and representatives and governors need to be pushing a single solution to relieve Appalachia, because that's something, if you have 8 states and the weight of their senators and their congressmen pushing it and saying, this is just and fair. We built the nation's cities, we built the railroads, we built the bridges, and now it's time for the rest of the country to pony up. And part of the way we do that is we do a just transition to a green economy. And we make it an energy producing region for the whole eastern half of the United States. And we use the Reclaim Act, we use reclaim mines for solar, for wind, and the infrastructure that comes along with it. Now that businesses are not going to go to a city that does not have, good businesses are not going to go to a city with no hospitals, with bad schools, bad infrastructure, no power, without the power to support or even broadband, the problem we have out here in rural Kentucky. So along with this Appalachian Reconstruction Project, it's going to be a huge federal level, and I'm talking about the level of Works Project Administration, to rebuild the infrastructure and make the places desirable, with roads, with hospitals, with schools, and with connectivity to the outside world. That's my plan.
I find that very compelling, partly because the regional approach may actually result in a better outcome for all of the individual states versus kind of like poking around the edges every cycle with a little bit of bacon for this state and a little bit of bacon for that state. It sounds like you're taking a longer view, which is refreshing. Hopefully, I'm fingers crossed, Mike, that the voters kind of resist the urge to just kind of go with the familiar or go with like the cynical view, because I think you're kind of you're speaking to a higher purpose and a more holistic approach. Hopefully that's what the democratic system will reward. Although I have to say, I'm a little worried, and maybe I'm being a little cynical here. I don't know, man. Sometimes I see the voters influenced by maybe less information or uneven information or just tribal kind of like my team is better than your team stuff. How do you feel like you can break through this polarized world that we're in right now?
Well, I mean, let's just circle back to leadership. There's fundamentally 2 types of leadership. There's transactional and transformational, right? Mm-hmm. And what you have now in DC is purely transactional, and the relationship even between Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell is purely transactional. McConnell lets Trump do whatever he wants, and he gets to pack the federal bench with people with unqualified judges with lifetime appointments, which is his real objective. And he gets to make a ton of money on the way. And so he doesn't fool with Trump, and he gets to do whatever he wants in the Senate. So that's a transactional relationship. I'm gambling that people are ready for a transformational leader. And I'm no Barack Obama, I'm no Andrew Yang, but when you talk about a higher purpose and with your message and your vision, and you try to inspire people to something better than the status quo, which is just getting that paycheck, you get more out of people. You get more work, you get more energy, more enthusiasm, you get more innovation, that they're invested in stepping towards a better future. And that's why I told you I used to teach this class at Cal, the leadership and management, and it was the kids who'd been through business school understood the mechanics, they understood the science of management, but it was like trying to, okay, let's take it beyond that. Communicate your vision, make people make people feel like they're invested in something, and you got to convince them that it's for their good to put in the work now, because we'll be a better place when this is all done. And that's the path I've taken with my campaign. And of course, Mitch McConnell said that it's an ad against me called them socialist fantasies. Having a vision and communicating effectively is part of being a good leader.
Right on. Next question. Let's imagine you're in the Senate. You beat Mitch. Now you're a national figure. And this guy, Andrew Yang, starts running for president in 2024.
All in.
Will you be supportive of his candidacy?
Absolutely. I mean, you kind of called him out on the show yesterday about the Bernie Biden thing.
Yeah.
But because let's talk about this transformational. Bernie is a transformational leader. He's got a vision, and it's something that I think that the Yang Gang understands, that this is a huge change. It's a tectonic shift for the economy and what we view as capitalism. And but there's a time for pragmatism too, and it's I think Andrew saw that and said, okay, now we need to move forward. We can keep grinding on this and get nowhere, or we can move on to the next stage. And so, yeah, much love, 2024.
All right. You heard it here. So when Senator Broihier is asked if he supports Yang 2024, we'll have it on video, Mike.
All right. You know what? That's put it in the can and mark it.
I love it. Well, Mike, I really appreciate you coming back on the show. It's been a fantastic conversation. I hope the people out there who are watching this live, there was about 100 concurrents just on YouTube alone, and then plus the folks on Twitter. And then we'll have probably close to 1,000 or 2,000 that are going to watch it on replay. I hope everybody that's watching this finds solace in the fact that, yes, a lot of us are bummed that Andrew is no longer running for president, but that doesn't mean that America doesn't have great potential leaders that are able and ready to step into the breach. And Mike, you seem like someone who's lived, experienced a lot, as you mentioned, not only as a veteran, but as a farmer and an educator, and then working in journalism. Like, I hope people look at you really seriously. And the question I would have is like, what else do you need from this man? Like, he's got a great resume. He seems like a great guy. He's not some latte sipping, idealist. He just wants to make the country better. So if you are in Kentucky and you're seeing this, please check Mike out. And if you're not in Kentucky and you're seeing this, please check Mike out, because if we can get more senators and congressmen to have open minds and be willing to think about bold ideas like Mike is, like, we will make the country better. And I'm just super excited about your candidacy, Mike, and I'll be rooting for you 100%.
Thanks, Tom. And I'll tell you, the Yang Gang is, I just mentioned the term force multiplier, but the Yang Gang is a force multiplier. They're so connected and so hooked in, and I mean, the number of donations, I can tell where they're coming from, and even $1, $2, $5 donations. I'd rather have, I'd rather have $1,005 donations than a couple max out to me, because it means a lot more. And the most important thing is they're sharing the message and they're sharing their enthusiasm. They're telling their friends, saying, check this cat out. I think he's the real deal. And, it's been my relationship with you and the rest of the Yang Gang has been a huge shot in the arm for morale. And morale is an important part of leadership. Sometimes a leader needs a morale too, and so it's been a huge pump of enthusiasm for my campaign being exposed and having this opportunity to talk to y'all. And so thank you. And when you run out of guests, send me a text or something. And we'll talk about something else.
Yeah, no, I have a feeling this won't be the last time you'll be on the show, Mike. Actually, something just occurred to me. I forgot to ask you, have you talked to the Humanity Forward folks, Andrew's team, about what help you can get from that organization? And obviously, Andrew's only done one official endorsement so far. It sounds like more will be coming. Have you had an opportunity to trade notes with folks in the Humanity Forward?
I haven't, but I know they've been busy getting it off the ground, and I hope that they will make an endorsement that is bold and decisive, and not going with the party pick. So it would be huge to get an endorsement, and I hope if they choose to endorse, they endorse me, because I think I probably align closest with the values of the organization. But it would be great. Short answer, no, I've not talked to anybody, but I'd love to. So
right on. Well, if you're in the Yang Gang and you think that Mike's legit and the real deal, please feel free to let Andrew know on Twitter or talk to any of the Yang Gang kind of folks that that are working at Humanity Forward and say, hey, check this guy out. I'll be sure to do that as well, Mike. I will kind of send a couple links and say, hey, just in case he's not on your radar, he seems like he's worth a look, and fingers crossed that
Thanks,
we get
Tom.
some more air power over you.
That'd be fantastic. Thanks. I appreciate it. Always need the close air support, no doubt. Thanks, Tom.
We'll send a few Apaches over the horizon.
That'd be nice.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds. All right.